All right. So we are live on Facebook and so forth. Let me share this in a couple of places and we'll be ready to go. All right, I think we're everywhere we need to be. Everything is as it needs to be. Let me get everything framed up here. All right. Appreciate everyone being here with us tonight. We are back to our live streaming Zoom class. We appreciate everyone's patience with us last week and having to do the video. I hope that you watched that video and that you are ready to continue on in the study of Exodus. Last week, if you follow along in class, you notice that we got to Exodus chapter 2. That is where we're going to start off tonight, looking at Exodus 2. You remember Exodus 1 sort of gives us the background of telling us the continuation of the story of what Moses or God has done, how God has prepared his people. And we'll go ahead and go here. He has shown us this, the idea of Exodus in chapter 1, that the people had grown, remembered, and a new Pharaoh had come to rise that didn't know Joseph, and therefore that Pharaoh has sought to kill the Hebrews. We're going to find out tonight that Pharaoh actually dies before the Exodus, and possibly maybe more than one that die in between this. We don't know, but we're going to read tonight about the passing of one of the Pharaohs, and we're going to see what happens after that Pharaoh passes, and we're going to look at Moses' life. It's very interesting. In the first four chapters of Exodus, although chapter 1's an introduction, chapter 2 is going to cover around about an 80-year period in Moses' life. A very brief synopsis of what happens, and then we're going to see what happens after this into the next point, into chapter 3 and 4. We're going to be seeing Moses at the age of 80. So that's what we're going to look at tonight, and that's what we're going to see. So let's go ahead and get started with the study, with what we're looking at. And so let's start here in Exodus chapter 2. Oh, sorry, this didn't do what it's supposed to do. There we go. Exodus chapter 2. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of the bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what will be done to him." So here we have the introduction to this famous story, famous account of Moses, to find out what happens to Moses, of what is going to be his life and his story. You'll notice it starts out by giving us Moses' lineage. Moses' lineage is clearly that he's a Jew. He's a Hebrew. He's not just any Hebrew. He's of the house of Levi. He's double the house of Levi, if you will, because his father and his mother are both from the house of Levi. Now, to determine your tribe was whatever your father was. Certain Israelites seem to view this purebred idea of a tribe more than others, but we're not sure about this situation of what, if there's any fact behind that. The main idea, the main focus here is that Moses was a true Israelite. Moses was a true Hebrew. He was a Levite. Now, the other thing to remember is that the tribe of Levi is not the priestly tribe yet. is not until later on in this book, about chapter 31 to 32, the golden calf, where the Levites going to act in a way that God's going to say, you're my chosen priestly tribe. So it's very interesting that Moses comes from this house, and it's going to lead in later when Aaron's the first high priest, because he's from the house of Levi. But you notice they have this husband and wife. They conceive a child. They conceive and bear a son. Now, what the text doesn't tell us here, because it's focusing on this story, on this context, is that this is not their first child. We even see that for a little later when we talk about this, but when we read this verse 2, we could see the idea this is talking about bearing a son, and usually when it talks about bearing a son, it talks about the first son, but this is not the first son for these two people. Matter of fact, it's not the second child for these two people. This is the third child that we know of. Because we're going to find out that Moses has an older brother of Aaron who's 3 years older than Moses. He has a sister whose name is Miriam, who apparently in this story is probably 4 or 5 years older than Moses. And then we have the third child of Moses. And so Moses is born. And he is born, and as he's born, he is born during the time of the edict that all the children were to be thrown into the Nile River, all the male children. She gives birth to Moses, and she hides him. She hides him as best she can for 3 months. And you know the process of a child. As the child grows and as the child develops, especially at about 3 or 4 month period, a child is very hard to conceal, very hard to keep from the cries being heard from people outside. So Moses' mother has to do something. Now, we're not told his mother's name until I think chapter 6, and that is that she is Jochebed. And so we see Jochebed here decides to build him a basket. Now, you'll notice what it says, when she could hang no longer, she built him a basket. The actual word here for basket is the word ark. It is the same word used in Genesis chapter 6, and there's very similar parallels between Genesis 6 and Exodus 2, in that ark is what saved Noah and his family, and this ark is what saves the people of Israel. It saves Moses, who later delivers the people of Israel. Now, the interesting about this is that we're told that she makes this ark, this basket, out of the bulrushes, and daubed it in bitumen and pitch. That very same formula of putting the pitch around the outside was the very same thing we see again in Genesis 6 that Noah does to cover the ark. And so this is the way to make it waterproof. As a matter of fact, these are two places you see this word of ark being used. And so you notice she takes the child, she puts him in the basket, in the ark, and she sets it on the reeds in the riverbank. Now, this is sort of interesting that she sets him in the reeds, in that she is keeping Pharaoh's command to a point, but not fully. She's not fully keeping Pharaoh's command in that they would take the newborn Hebrew children, the males, and throw them into the river. The idea was to throw them into the river so they drown. Here she takes them she puts them in a basket and puts them in the river. She does what Pharaoh said. Pharaoh said, throw them in the river. So she's keeping that command. And what she does, she puts them in the reeds. And a lot of people have asked questions throughout the history and asked, well, is she expecting something to happen? Is she expecting something to come about because of putting Moses where she is? Some people think that she may have done this because she knew this is where Pharaoh's daughter went to bathe. Some people think that this may not be necessarily where Pharaoh's daughter bathed, but maybe where the rich of the town would bathe. And hopefully she was hoping that the people would see this baby, hear this baby crying probably, and take him in, that someone would rescue her child. What's interesting about this is the Hebrew writer in Hebrews 11 tells us that it was by faith that Moses' parents put him in the basket and put him in the water. That it was their faith that put him there and that made them hope that God would deliver him, that God would save their child. And so her sister standing at the banks, and she watches. She's there spying out, looking what would happen when Pharaoh's daughter, or when somebody comes to the river to bathe. What's going to happen to Moses? Are they going to pull him out, or are they going to drown him? So we get to verse 5. It says, now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. While her young women walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the baby, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse your child for you? So you notice Pharaoh's daughter comes down to the river to bathe. Now, this idea of Pharaoh's daughter may be some kind of misleading maybe to us, in that we think, oh, well, this is a daughter that Pharaoh had interaction with day by day. She lived in Pharaoh's palace, so forth, so on. But Pharaoh was like the ruler, many rulers at that time. He probably had many wives. And probably had many daughters and many sons. Again, we don't know what Pharaoh this is, but all the Pharaohs typically had many wives and had many children. And so this may be another thing about this, is why this Egyptian woman takes this baby in, is because maybe she's not under the strict rule, the strict eye of Pharaoh. And again, this has been against Pharaoh's law, but she's there at the river and she begins to bathe. And you notice a very interesting thing. And again, this shows us the first person reaction is that the women are walking beside the river. The women are walking down the banks of the river. Reason for this is, as you know as well as I do, that the Nile is known for the crocodiles. It's known for the crocodiles that inhabit the waters. And so what these women were doing were on lookout. I've talked to missionaries to Africa who talk about American missionary, I forgot which one told me about it. He told me a story about going to the river to baptize somebody. And he said these two men, or maybe four, anyway, there's a group of men that come with them that had these big baseball bats. And they were walking the side of the river the whole time during the baptism. And the guy, the American missionary, said he was getting nervous about these, wondering why they were going to do it. This was somebody opposing them. He didn't think they were, because at the church service. And after he got done baptizing him and he come up out of the water, he asked them, well, why'd you do that? And they said, well, we do that to keep out the crocodiles. They said we do that so if we see the crocodile coming, we can swing the bat and hopefully deter the crocodile before he gets the preacher or the person being baptized. And the guy said that sort of made him reconsider the importance of baptism and think about how vital it was to do that, to risk a life, to go into that water to baptize somebody. And this is what they're doing. They're on the lookout for crocodiles. They're watching for crocodiles, or some even say maybe hippos, because hippos do the same thing, that they can be very, very aggressive. So they're looking to protect the daughter of Pharaoh. And as the daughter of Pharaoh is in the water, she looks off and she sees this basket in the reeds. She sees this ark there. And so she kills one of her servants to go get it. And when they get it, they bring it to her again. You know, she opens it. And as she opens it, she sees the child. She sees this child. Now, you remember, and I think I may have skipped this point, she saw in verse 2, Jochebed, Moses' mother, saw that this was a fine child, a good child, a healthy child. And so there's something about this child and his appearance that even when Pharaoh's daughter sees it, she has compassion on him. And not only that, she has compassion because she sees the baby crying. She sees this baby left here all alone, and she hears him crying. She sees him to be this beautiful child, and she takes pity on him. And again, you notice she took pity on this child, said this is one of the Hebrews' children. She realized this was one of the Hebrews, the babies, one of the slaves that her father is imprisoning or using in harsh slavery. One of the ones that he is making do all this hard work, one he's trying to eliminate. And then when she does this, she apparently decides that she's going to keep the child. And Moses' sister springs into action here. Moses' sister comes in and asks, do you want me to go get a nurse for you? What she's wanting is a Hebrew woman who can nurse him, who can take this child and be able to rear him, feed him, and wean him, get him to a certain age to where he can be weaned off and taken somewhere else. And so, or taken to her mother. What's interesting here is the idea that Pharaoh's daughter apparently knew Hebrew. In that she was able to interact with Miriam, Moses' sister. Again, we don't know her name until later. I think Exodus 15, we find her name. But she's able to converse with them, and this is not unusual. Some have said, well, why could she speak Hebrew? Well, if her servants were Hebrews, it's very common if your servants in the ancient world, if your servants speak a different language than you, then for you to know your servant's language so you can speak to them in their native tongue. And so she tells the daughter to go. And so the girl goes and she gets the child's mother. She goes to Jochebed and gets the very mother. Now, this is the interesting part of this story. As you look at verse 9, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. And when the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, because she said, I drew him out of the water. Now, she comes to Jochebed, comes to her, and she tells her, please take this child, nurse him, wean him, raise him for me, and then bring him to me. And so what the idea is that this growing older probably would have been, she probably took Moses into her house until the age of 4 or 5, probably at the earliest, when she would have took him back to Pharaoh's daughter. The idea is that she raised him. And the irony of this very thing is that Pharaoh said for these boys to be killed. Jochebed tries to intersect that or overcome that by putting Moses in a basket. And then, of all people to find him, it's Pharaoh's daughter. And then on top of that, on all that, Pharaoh's daughter pays Moses' mother to raise him. And so this is just a very interesting story. And you see the providence and the hand of God in all this, of what happened. And so she raises the child as her own. And then again, the child grows over. She brings him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She took him in. She adopted him. Then you notice she named him. Now, what's interesting about this goes back to what I said a minute ago. And some people have problems with this, is because she gave Moses a Hebrew name. Now, what's interesting about the name Moses, his name Moses is both Egyptian and Hebrew. It has a meaning in both. In Egyptian, the word Mosheth means sons. In the Hebrew, the name Moses means I drew out of the water, drew all out of the water. And so it's very interesting for Pharaoh's daughter here to say she names it Moses and not give the Egyptian version of that interpretation of the name, but to give the Hebrew version. Again, this lends providence, or lends probability to the cause that she knew Hebrew. She probably spoke it with her servants. And so she raises Moses as her own. And so Moses is raised in Pharaoh's house. But in all of that, Moses is still seen to have known his lineage. He's still seen as to know that he is a Hebrew, to know that he is one of the Hebrew, an Israelite. And so this leads us into verse 11. Verse 11, one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens and saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hit him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together, and he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? And he answered, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, surely the thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So notice that what happens next is that Moses grows up. We don't know from the Exodus account how old Moses is, but Philip will tell us in Acts 7, the typical Jewish translation or Jewish thought of this is that Moses was 40. So Moses is 40 years old when he does this. Stephen will also tell us the motivation here. There is a little bit of a hint here that Moses is trying to do this, but it's not spelled out clearly. And the idea is that here in Exodus 2, verse 11, Moses is trying to save the people. Because he goes out, he sees the people, he sees their burdens, and he wants to be the defender of the people. He wants to be the savior of the people. And he saw one of the Hebrews being beaten. Now, this is a very interesting thing. This shows us the side of Moses we may not realize, and that is that Moses was a caring soul. He was he was a man who cared for the oppressed. Because notice, he sees one of the Hebrews being beaten, and in seeing this, he looks around to make sure no one's watching, and he strikes the Egyptian and kills him. Now, again, you'll notice something here. The Bible does not give any indication that what Moses did was right. It doesn't say that Moses did this by the command of God, that Moses was forgiven for this. None of that is mentioned. It's simply that the fact is recorded. This is something Moses did of his own self. And again, Stephen alludes that Moses did this to try to get the Hebrew children to follow him, to see him as a leader. And so he takes the Egyptian, he strikes him and hides him in the sand. He buries him where no one can find him. And then you notice the next day he goes back out. And here's the second time Moses sees the oppressed. This time he sees 2 Hebrews fighting. He sees 2 Hebrew children fighting together. And again, you notice he says to the man in the wrong. He stands up for the guy being wrong. He goes to the one who's done the offense and asks him, why are you doing this? Why are you attacking your brother? And so this man answers back the wrong in his defense and his anger. He calls out, who made you a prince or a ruler and a judge over us? He asked him, who put you in charge? Who says you're the leader of all of us? Now, this is very interesting considering this is Pharaoh's family he's talking to. That leads some credence to the idea that probably the Israelites knew who Moses was. They knew that Moses was truly a Hebrew or an Israelite, just living in the Egyptian house. And so they questioned Moses. Again, being in Pharaoh's house, he would have missed all of the enjoyment, all the hardships, of the slave life, and enjoyed the pleasures of Pharaoh. But again, the guy calls him out by, do you mean to kill me as you did the Egyptian? And this reveals to Moses that the people knew. That word was getting out that Moses was Moses had killed an Egyptian. And so you notice in the next part, Moses was afraid. Moses was afraid and thought, surely the thing is known. He realizes that what he thought was a secret, a hidden deed, was actually known to everyone. Now, the irony about this, before we get into that next part, the irony about this man asking Moses, who made you a prince and judge over us, is that in 40 years, Moses is going to come back and he's going to be the prince and ruler and judge over the Israelites. And God's going to be the one who made him. But it wasn't quite yet God's timing. Moses tried to do this on his own, and Moses fails. And therefore, Moses is afraid. Now, the Hebrew writer will tell us that Moses did not fear Pharaoh. Moses wasn't afraid of Pharaoh. So who is Moses afraid of here? I think Moses was afraid because the people didn't stand behind him. He was afraid because he was getting ready to lead Israel. Stephen, again, will tell us he was getting ready to lead Israel out of Egypt, but the Israelites wouldn't follow him. And so he's afraid because the people are not standing with him as he thought they would. And then you notice verse 15, when Pharaoh hears of it, Moses leaves. Pharaoh tries to kill Moses. He tries to destroy Moses because in Pharaoh's, you remember the Egyptians, talked about it in Joseph, the Egyptians looked down upon the foreigners, even a foreigner in his own house. Pharaoh would have viewed this as a capital, serious offense for one of the Israelites to have killed an Egyptian. Even again, if this was the son of his daughter, adopted son of one of his daughters, he was ready to put Moses to death. And so Moses has to leave, and Moses flees from Pharaoh and goes to the land of Midian. And as he goes there, he sits down by a well. Now, you'll notice in the Old Testament, a lot of things happen at a well. This is a very similar story to Isaac, very similar story to Jacob. They get their family start at the well. Isaac, by the servant of Abraham, when he goes to the well in Padan Aram, where he meets Rebekah, and Jacob, when he goes to the well and he meets Rachel. And so here Moses is at a well as well. And again, we see Moses' life changed. Because the next verse, it says, verse 16, now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flocks. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. And when they come home to their father Reuel, he said, how is it that you have come home so soon today? So let's stop there for a second. Look at these verses. We're introduced into another major character, another big character. It may not be major, maybe called a minor character, but an important character nonetheless, of Reuel or Jethro. This name is later called Jethro. Same guy. This is Moses' father-in-law going to be. He's a priest of God in the land of Midian. The land of Midian at this time would have extended down into the Sinai Peninsula, where Mount Sinai is. Now, that land in between Canaan and Egypt. So Moses is not far out of Egypt, probably a few days' journey out of Egypt. And he comes to this well. Now, I told you a lot of things happen at the well. And as he's sitting at this well, he sees these 7 daughters, these 7 women come to the well to draw water. Whenever we've seen this before, when women come to draw water at the well, there's always problems. The reason for this is because when the men come, the men drive the women away and they make the women go last. And this is what happens here. These women came to draw water, and they drew some water and started to fill the troughs up. But then the shepherds came. The men shepherds came and they drove the girls away. They drove these women away, not just girls, these women, and refused to let them do this. And apparently from verse 18, this was a common occurrence, that typically the shepherdesses would have to wait until the shepherds got done before they could water their flock. But here for the third time in this short chapter, we see Moses stand up for the afflicted, because what does he do? Notice in verse 17, he stood up and saved the women. He saved the daughters. And not only did he save them, not only did he stood up for them and stopped the men from driving away, from bullying them, what we would call bullying them most likely, he stopped them from doing that, and he himself began to draw water. He himself began to water the flocks for them. And then when they get home, you notice their father, Ruel, sees them coming in, and he says, well, how are you here so early today? What's different? Usually, apparently, the idea is that they had to wait probably till sundown or even after sundown before they could get home, because they had to wait for all the shepherds to get done before they could feed water their flocks. But here they're home early, and Ruel says, well, what happened? He's concerned. This is an oddity. What's happened? And so, verse 19, they said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and even drew water for us and watered the flock. He said to his daughters, then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah, who gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he has said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. So the daughters come and they tell Ruel, well, there was an Egyptian there. Now this tells us about Moses a little bit. Even in his appearance, his mannerism, although he knew he was a Hebrew, understood he was a Hebrew, chose to be a Hebrew, according to Hebrews, the Hebrew letter of chapter 11, and that he forsake the pleasures of Pharaoh's house to be called an Israelite, he still looked, talked, and acted like an Egyptian. And so as he put on this act of the Egyptian, that's what these women label him as, an Egyptian. And they said, well, the Egyptian was there and he saved us and he watered the flocks. And the father, this is sort of, to me, always been a comical one, because the father's reaction to his 7 daughters is, well, where is he? This guy just saved you time. He rescued you from these other shepherds. He watered your flocks. He took care of you. Where is he? Why did you leave him there? And that's what we ask now. Why did you leave the man? And he says, you leave and go get him and tell him to come eat with us. Tell him that he can come eat. And so Moses comes, and apparently he talks to Ruel. They begin to discuss, probably no telling what all they discuss, but apparently it comes down to the idea that Ruel finds out who Moses is, what Moses' background is. Again, believing in the same God and following the same God, that Moses decides to dwell with Midian. And apparently Moses is taken into Ruel's house, and that he begins to watch after Ruel's flocks. And then not only that, this verse is so packed with information, is that he only dwells with the people there. He also marries into the family. Ruel, the priest, gives his daughter Zipporah to Moses to be married. And then in time, she gives birth to a son, and they call his name Gershom. And this word Gershom means stranger or foreigner. And Moses says he names this because I've been a sojourner in a foreign land. Again, speaking of his life as a Hebrew, an Egyptian, adopted Egyptian living in the land of Midian. And so we go from there to the next few verses of this chapter to see the end of this. Now, verse 22 sort of leaves us with the story of Moses for just a few verses. And now we go back and find out what happens in Egypt. And the reason for this is because when Moses goes into Midian, when he leaves Egypt and when he kills the Egyptian, he's in Midian for 40 years. We're going to find out a little later that Moses is 80 years old when he comes back into Egypt. And that's an amazing thought, that at 80, Moses takes on this endeavor. Most of us, I was thinking about that today. Here I am about 40. And I was thinking about my relationship to this story of age-wise and said, I think about it, it's I'm the age Moses was when he tried to lead Israel, but he failed. He failed because he tried to do it in his way by killing the Egyptian, not by doing it God's way. And so he waits 40 years, and God's going to use him after 40 years. He's 80. And I thought about that. I was like, can you imagine, to myself, I was thinking this afternoon, imagine for a minute being 80 years old and trying to lead a bunch of people to the desert. That's what Moses is about to do. But we're going to see that next week. Before we get there, we got to finish these last few verses. We'll be done for tonight, because this is an interlude to tell us about what's happening in Egypt. Verse 23, during those days, the king of Egypt died. Again, the Pharaoh that ordered for all the Egyptian Israelite boys to be killed died. And the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Now, notice, during those days, those many days, so that's 40 years, king of Egypt dies. What that tells us is the man who sought Moses' life is dead. He's gone. So that king is no longer in control. And again, we're not told exactly that. We assume there'd be one Pharaoh here. There may have possibly been two Pharaohs that came up during this time, depending on the timing of this. We really don't know. But there's a different Pharaoh in control. But notice, even though the Pharaohs have changed, the Israelites are still slaves. The Israelites are forced into slavery for over 40 years. And they cry out to God. They cry out to God for deliverance. And again, notice the last part of verse 23, their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. Now, this is a very interesting phrase, because we look at this and say, why did they wait 40 years to cry out to God? Well, the idea of that phrase is not they waited out 40 years, it's that this was a time God decided to act. That God was waiting. God was waiting. Waiting for what? God was waiting for his leader to be ready. Because we're going to see what we just saw in the first two chapters, and we're going to see in the next few chapters, sets up Moses to be the great leader Israel needs. By the age of 40, Moses wasn't ready. Moses thought he was ready. He tried to be ready. He tried to lead Israel, but he couldn't. It wasn't the right time. God's waiting. And then this idea in verse 24 of God remembered his covenant. It's not that God forgot about it like we sometimes do. You know, we tell ourselves, or we tell somebody, oh yeah, I'll do this for you in the next few days. And then a week later, it dawns, oh wait, I was supposed to do that. I promised so-and-so I was going to do that. I better go do that. That's not God. God never forgot this. The same word is used to describe God in Genesis 8, when God remembered Noah. And God remembered Noah on the ark. It wasn't that God forgot Noah on the ark. God didn't forget the Israelites. The idea that God remembered was that God is going to take action. God is going to take action to fulfill his promise. And that's what God does here. God hears their groaning. He remembers his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he would bless them, that they would take the land of Canaan. It would be their land. And God begins to set things in motion to allow that to happen. And then verse 25, and God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Well, what did God know? God knew the time was right. God knew Israel was ready. God knew his leader was finally ready. It's been 40 years. Moses is 80. Moses is a lot more knowledgeable. Moses is a lot more wise. Moses is ready to lead his people. And so God is preparing this great exodus. And this is a beautiful story that sets up this beautiful chapter. In its very concise way, sets up the narrative of what's going to happen throughout the rest of the book of Exodus. But for tonight, that gets us through with Exodus chapter 2. Now, again, the interesting thing to me about this is to remember that no matter what happens in this life, no matter what happens in our lives, that God will fulfill his promises. As God has told us, it may not be in our timing, it may not be when we want, but God will fulfill his promise. God will make sure he lives up to his end of the bargain if we'll live up to ours. And that's what happens here. He fulfills his word to Abraham, he fulfills his word to Isaac, he fulfills his word to Jacob, and all those sons after. Even the promise that Joseph himself referenced at the end of Genesis, that God would deliver them, God would set them free, God would bring them back to Canaan, the land he promised Abraham and the land he promised Isaac and Jacob. And God's about to do that when he comes down into Egypt and he delivers Israel in a way that has never been done in history and has never been repeated, a way that there's no doubt that it was God who delivered them, no one else. But that's all tonight for Exodus chapter 2. I appreciate you joining us this afternoon. I appreciate you being here. I know we got a good crew online on our Zoom class. I know we got a good crew watching us on Facebook and YouTube. I hope that you're having a good week. I hope that you're having a blessed week. I hope you stay dry with this rain we're going to be getting the next few days. But I hope everybody's doing well. We hope, if at all possible, we'll see you Sunday morning at 10 a.m. If not, remember we do that on live stream as well, so you can catch us there. Then also remember FBI class on Tuesday night, and also remember next week we'll pick back up in Exodus chapter 3. But I believe that's all we've got for tonight. I'm going to go ahead and end this live stream. Again, I appreciate everyone being here. I appreciate you joining us. And again, we hope to see you next